Well, at the Russia summit, or at the Russia-Africa summit taking place in St. Petersburg, African nations pressed Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the Ukraine war. They are calling on Moscow to renew the Black Sea grain deal that it tore up last week. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa insisted that the African leaders travel to St. Petersburg to advocate for peace in Ukraine and to reopen the Black Sea for trade, and not to plead for donations of grain to the African continent.
Proposed that we would like the Black Sea initiative to be implemented, and that the Black Sea should be opened. And in that regard, we were saying, so that we are understood, we were saying we would like the Black Sea to be open to the world market. And we were not here, as we are not, coming to plead for donations for the African continent.
This comes after Putin's commitment at the forum that Russia will replace the Ukrainian grain supply affected by its deal exit. Putin said that he respects their proposal and added that Moscow was increasing food supplies to Africa, including the free grain shipments he announced earlier. Putin had promised free grain supplies to 6 African nations, namely Eritrea, which is at the north, Somalia, Zimbabwe, which is at the south, Central African Republic, which is at the center of African continent, Burkina Faso, and Mali, which is in West Africa. Remember, Eritrea and Mali are the only African nations to have repeatedly voted in Russia's favor in the United Nations General Assembly resolutions. Moreover, in both Mali and Central African Republic, Russia's Wagner mercenary group remains active. In a closing address to a Russia-Africa summit, the president of Russia said he had shown readiness to negotiate with Ukraine and that the other side now needed to be persuaded.
Но я знаю, что вы искренне стремитесь оказать возможное содействие в достижении справедливого и устойчивого разрешения конфликта. И мы, конечно, очень ценим ваш сбалансированный подход, а также то, что вы не поддержали и не поддерживаете антироссийскую риторику, антироссийскую кампанию. А если бы это произошло, у нас бы сейчас и разговора бы этого не состоялось, конечно.
Dr. Malcolm Davies is a senior analyst in defense strategy and capability at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Is now joining us from Canberra. Dr. Malcolm, welcome to the show, and it's good to have you with us at this hour. What do you make of President Putin wooing African heads of state and promising free grain shipments, to 6 African countries? Does this not go against the deal or international laws?
Well, let's be clear. President Putin ordered the Russian military to attack the grain silos and ports in Ukraine to cut off the flow of grain to those African countries shortly after pulling out of the grain deal. So for him then to say, having created the crisis in the first place, for him then to say, oh, well, we'll provide you with the grain you need, I think is very, very mafia-like. I think that the African countries really do need to be honest with themselves here. It is Russia that is creating the problem, not presenting the solution, okay? And I think that that needs to be made clear by the African states that they will not accept any grain provided by Russia, that instead what they should demand is that Russia allow Ukraine to ship grain as previously was the case. In other words, rejoin the grain deal unconditionally.
Dr. Malcolm, if Africa does indeed reject President Putin's promises or proposal, then what alternatives does the continent have now?
They have to work with NATO to ensure that Ukraine can export its grain. And that probably means NATO combined with some representation from the African countries to escort Ukrainian commercial shipping from Ukrainian ports to ship that grain, and basically to deter Russia from attacking those shipments. So I think that the Russian countries do need to step away from their association with Russia and with Putin and instead engage with NATO and Ukraine and firmly side with those countries and essentially make it clear to Putin that he is behaving unacceptably.
I think, Dr. Malcolm, the African leaders did do that yesterday, where South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said that they are not there for seeking donations from, Russia or Ukraine. They're there so that the, peace deal can be enhanced between Russia and Ukraine, and these two individuals will have a chance to talk. And the president did say that he will analyze the peace proposal by the African heads of state. It's been more than a month since the African delegation met Putin and also met President Zelensky. Should he be believed this time round that the proposals will be keenly analyzed?
Well, any proposal that would see Russian forces still occupying 1 inch of Ukrainian territory are unacceptable. A peace deal, a peace negotiation can occur when Russia has withdrawn all its forces from all of Ukraine, including Crimea. Only at that point can we have some form of negotiation as to preventing this sort of attack by Russia on Ukraine in the future. And that would invariably involve Ukraine joining NATO as a full member. It would involve Article 5 security guarantees to Ukraine from NATO. It would involve Ukraine becoming a member of the EU. And I think at that point, yes, of course, we can sit down and talk with the Russians. But until that point comes, until the Ukrainians can win decisively on the ground, there should be no negotiations that would see essentially Russia steal victory from the jaws of defeat. There needs to be a clear, decisive defeat of Russia in Ukraine before you can have peace.
Dr. Malcolm, before I let you go, very quickly, what do you think about the timing of the African peace proposal to Russia and Ukraine?
Look, peace proposals are put forward, but as I said, until Russia withdraws from all of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, a peace negotiation, a ceasefire would be actually counterproductive, because what it would do is it would preserve Russian gains through the use of force, and it would sow the seeds for a future war by Russia against Ukraine or against another NATO state. So it would be very premature, and it would be counterproductive because it would actually make the situation worse. Russia needs to be defeated. Russia needs to withdraw. And then you have a peace negotiation. And the African states can be part of that because obviously they've been affected by Russia's actions. But we cannot have a situation where Ukraine is forced to cede territory in return for some farcical facade of peace that basically is there to give Russia time to rebuild its forces so it can launch another war in a few years.
All right, I've been talking to a senior analyst in defense strategy and capability at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Dr. Malcolm Davis. As always, thank you very much for talking to WION World is One.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.